She never thought the love of her life would be the one to break her the most. It wasn't just the pain of losing him, it was how he did it. Cold, heartless, as if all those years together meant nothing. One moment, they were making plans for the future, laughing over dinner, talking about the little things that made life special. The next, he was gone. No warning, no explanation. Just a few careless words that cut deeper than a knife. You're not enough for me. At first, she crumbled. Nights blurred into mornings, and she could barely drag herself out of bed. The weight of heartbreak felt unbearable, like a storm that refused to pass. She replayed their last conversation over and over, searching for answers, wondering if she had done something wrong. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about her not being enough. This was about him never seeing her worth in the first place. That realization was the turning point. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but something inside her shifted. If she wasn't enough for him, she would become more than enough for herself. No more waiting for closure, no more begging for an explanation. She picked herself up, wiped her tears, and got to work. Every time she wanted to text him, she opened her laptop instead. Every time she missed him, she poured that energy into her goals. She pushed herself harder than ever, chasing dreams she had once put on hold for him. Late nights, early mornings, she refused to stop. And slowly, success started knocking on her door. First, it was a small win recognition from someone she admired. Then, a bigger opportunity. Before she knew it, she was making waves in ways she never imagined. The same people who once overlooked her now wanted to be in her circle. She had built something incredible, something undeniable. And him? He was nowhere to be found. Until one day, he was. Out of the blue, his name popped up on her phone. A simple message, "Hey, it's been a while." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding, but not in the way it used to. She wasn't the same person he had left behind. She had grown, changed, become someone he no longer had access to. But what would she do? Ignore him? Reply? Confront him after all this time? The choice was hers now. She stared at the message for a long time, her heart strangely calm, as if it had already made the decision before her mind could catch up. I made a mistake. It was almost laughable how simple those words were, how little they reflected the destruction he had left behind. A mistake? That's what he was calling it now? After everything? She could still remember the weight of his words the night he left. How final they felt. How she had sat in that empty apartment, staring at the space he used to fill, wondering how someone could walk away so easily. How she had begged herself not to text him, not to call, not to hope for an apology that would never come. And now, here it was. The apology. The regret. But why now? Her phone buzzed again. Can we meet? A sharp laugh escaped her. He wanted to meet. As if time hadn't passed. As if she hadn't rebuilt herself from the ground up. As if she hadn't spent months teaching herself how to exist without him. She locked her phone and tossed it onto the couch, pushing herself up and walking toward the window. The city lights blurred in the distance, glowing against the night sky. There was a time when she would have dropped everything at the chance to hear his voice again, when she would have rewritten every boundary just to let him back in. But that time was gone. Still, the message lingered in her mind long after she had turned her phone over, long after she had convinced herself she wouldn't respond. The next morning, she woke up to another message. I know I don't deserve it, but please. Just once. A sigh escaped her lips as she sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. He was persistent, she'd give him that. But was it persistence or desperation? And why did she care? She spent the day throwing herself into work, ignoring the weight in her chest, the way her hands hesitated every time she reached for her phone. But no matter how busy she kept herself, the thought remained. By late evening, she gave in. Fine. One time. The response came almost immediately. "Thank you. Tomorrow at 7? She hesitated before typing back. "Where?" A pause. Then his reply. "The Old Calf." Her breath hitched. Of course, he would choose that place. The little corner cafe where they used to spend hours talking about everything and nothing. The place where he had first told her he loved her. The place that, once upon a time, had felt like theirs. She stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Every part of her was telling her to back out, to walk away, to leave the past exactly where it belonged. But something else, something deeper, wanted to see. Wanted to hear what he had to say. Okay. The word sent, and just like that, the past had found a way back in. The next evening she found herself standing outside the cafe, the warm glow of the lights inside, casting a familiar golden hue onto the pavement. The place hadn't changed much. Same rustic wooden tables, same quiet hum of conversation, same corner booth where they used to sit. It was strange how something so familiar could feel so distant now. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door. He was already there, sitting in that same spot, fingers tapping against the rim of his cup. The moment he looked up, their eyes met, and for a brief second, neither of them spoke. She had expected him to look different, older maybe, worn by time the way she had been. But he looked almost the same, except for the flicker of something in his expression, something that hadn't been there before. Regret. She took a slow breath and walked over, sliding into the seat across from him. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table. "What do you want?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I don't know where to start." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Try the truth." He sighed, rubbing his temple before looking at her again. "I messed up. I was selfish. And I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." Her stomach twisted at the words, but she kept her expression unreadable. She had spent too long crying over the past, too long rebuilding herself from the damage he had left. She wasn't about to let a few sentences unravel her. "That's what they all say, isn't it?" she said quietly. "When they come back." His jaw tightened. "It's not like that." "Then what's it like?" she challenged. He exhaled sharply and looked down at his cup, as if the answer was swirling somewhere in the dark liquid. "I thought I needed something else. I thought I wanted something different. And when I walked away, I told myself I was doing the right thing. But I wasn't." He looked up, his eyes searching hers. "I was scared." The words hung between them, heavy with all the things unsaid. She felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, something else she couldn't quite name. There was a time when she would have given anything to hear him say those words. But now she wasn't sure what to do with them. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "And now? You say all of this now, when I've moved on." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I needed to see you. I needed you to know that I regret it." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay composed. "What do you expect me to do with that?" His lips parted, as if he had an answer, but then he hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I needed to say it." Silence stretched between them. The sounds of the cafe faded into the background. Finally, she shook her head. "You don't just get to come back and say you regret it. That doesn't erase what you did." "I know," he said again, his voice quieter now. I miss you." Her breath hitched, but she kept her face neutral. She wouldn't let herself be pulled back in, not like this. She stood up, reaching for her coat. "You miss the version of me that needed you. But that's not who I am anymore." His face fell, but she didn't let herself waver. She had come here for answers, and she had gotten them. And now, it was time to walk away. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she took a deep breath. The past had come knocking, but this time she wasn't answering. As she walked away from the cafe, Her mind raced with everything he had said. The words lingered in the air around her, refusing to settle. I miss you. She had waited so long to hear those words, but now that they had finally been spoken, they felt hollow, like an echo of something that no longer belonged to her. She gripped the strap of her bag tighter, her pace quickening. She wouldn't let herself get caught up in this again. She had come too far, built too much. But no matter how much she told herself she was done, something deep inside still twisted at the sound of his voice, at the way his eyes had searched hers, like he was trying to find a way back in. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She already knew who it was before she even looked. Please, just talk to me. She swallowed hard, then shut off her phone and kept walking. For days, she tried to push it all away, to bury herself in work, in plans, in anything that would keep her mind occupied. But the past had a way of creeping in when she least expected it. She would be in the middle of a meeting, and suddenly, she'd hear his voice in her head. She would be walking down the street, and some familiar song would play from a cafe speaker, pulling her right back to all the things she wanted to forget. Then, one night, she found herself standing in front of her apartment window, staring at the city skyline, and she realized something terrifying. She wasn't angry anymore. That was what scared her the most. Anger had been her armor, her shield. It had protected her from the ache, from the longing. But now, all that was left was the quiet weight of what could have been. And that's when she knew she was in trouble. She hadn't responded to his messages since the night at the cafe, but he hadn't stopped trying. Each one was more desperate than the last. And yet, she hadn't blocked him. She kept telling herself she would, that she should, but something kept her from pressing that button. Then, late one evening, after another long day of trying to pretend none of it mattered, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. Her fingers hovered over the screen, heart pounding. She shouldn't pick up. She knew that. But before she could stop herself, her thumb moved, and suddenly, his voice was in her ear. I know you don't want to talk to me, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. And I get it. But please, just listen. She closed her eyes, bracing herself. I don't know what you expect me to say. There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, he exhaled. I need to see you. One last time. Her stomach twisted. For what? I can't explain over the phone. She hesitated. Every part of her told her to end the call, to walk away for good. But something in his voice was different this time. Something wasn't right. Please, he said again. If you never want to hear from me after this, I'll respect that. But just meet me. Tonight. Against all logic, she found herself nodding. Where? He hesitated, then gave her a location. Not the cafe this time. Somewhere different. Somewhere unfamiliar. She hung up without saying another word, her heart pounding. As she grabbed her coat and stepped out into the night, a strange feeling settled in her chest, one she couldn't quite place. Something told her this meeting wasn't going to be like the last. She stood outside the unfamiliar building, her breath visible in the cold night air. The street was quieter than she expected, too quiet. Something about the place felt off. It wasn't a restaurant or a cafe. It was just an old building, the kind that had been there forever, but no one really noticed. A single streetlight flickered above her, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Her phone buzzed again. His name flashed on the screen. She hesitated before answering. You're here, he said, his voice low. Yeah, she replied, scanning the area. Where are you? Inside. Come up. She hesitated. Every instinct in her told her to turn around and leave. But something about his voice, it wasn't just the usual regret or desperation. It was something else. Something that almost sounded like fear. She stepped forward, pushing open the heavy door. The hallway inside was dimly lit, the faint hum of an old light bulb buzzing somewhere above. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way up the narrow staircase. When she reached the top, she found him standing at the end of the hall, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes shadowed with something unreadable. "You came?" he said, almost like he hadn't expected her to. "You said this was important." She folded her arms. "So? What is this?" He glanced down the hall, as if making sure no one else was there, then looked back at her. "There's something I need to tell you." She exhaled sharply, frustration creeping in. "That's what you said last time. This is different." His voice was lower now, serious in a way that made her uneasy. "I thought I was reaching out because I missed you. Because I wanted to fix what I broke. But there's more to it than that." Her stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking away for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "I didn't just leave because I was scared. Someone made sure I left." Her breath caught. "What?" "There were things going on that I didn't tell you about," he admitted. "Things that if I had stayed, they would have dragged you into." She took a step back. "You're not making any sense." "I know." He sighed. "But you have to believe me. Leaving you was the hardest thing I ever did. But I wasn't given a choice." A cold feeling settled in her chest. "Who?" He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed from below. Fast. Purposeful. His eyes widened. "We have to go. Now." She didn't have time to ask questions. He grabbed her hand, pulling her down the back stairs just as the front door creaked open. She didn't know who was coming. She didn't know why. But the look in his eyes told her one thing: this wasn't just about their past anymore. This was bigger. And it was only just beginning. They ran through the back exit, the cold night air hitting her like a shock. His grip on her wrist was tight, urgent, but her mind was spinning too fast to process what was happening. She wanted to stop, to demand answers, but the sound of footsteps behind them kept her moving. Whoever was after them wasn't far. He led her down a narrow alley, turning sharply around a corner, finally stopping when they were hidden in the shadows between two buildings. His breathing was heavy, his hands braced against the wall. "Are you going to tell me what's going on now?" she asked, trying to steady her own breath. He looked at her, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "I didn't want to drag you into this." "Well, too late for that," she shot back. "Start talking." He exhaled, glancing over his shoulder before finally facing her. "The reason I left. It wasn't just about us. It was about something bigger. Something I got caught up in without realizing." She stared at him, waiting. "There were people," he continued, lowering his voice. "People I shouldn't have trusted. At first, it was harmless small things, favors, connections. But then I found out something I wasn't supposed to know. And when I tried to walk away, they made it clear I had no choice." Her stomach twisted. "And you think they're still after you?" "I know they are," he said. "I thought it was over, that they had moved on. But I was wrong." A shiver ran down her spine. "So what do they want now?" He hesitated before answering. "You." Her heart nearly stopped. "What?" "They know I reached out to you," he admitted. "That's why I needed to see you. I needed to warn you." A sharp noise cut through the air, something metallic, maybe a door slamming shut. He grabbed her hand again, pulling her deeper into the alley. "We can't stay here," he said urgently. She followed, her pulse pounding in her ears. None of this made sense. Why her? What did these people want? But she barely had time to process before he stopped suddenly, pulling her back against the wall. A dark figure stepped into the alley, moving slowly, deliberately. She couldn't make out their face, but she could feel the tension thick in the air. "Too late," the figure said, voice smooth, almost amused. She felt his grip tighten on her hand. "Run." But before they could move, more figures emerged from the darkness, blocking every way out. Her breath caught in her throat. No escape. The figure stepped closer, the dim glow of the streetlight finally revealing their face. And in that moment, everything inside her went still. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone she knew, someone she never would have expected. And just like that, everything she thought she understood shattered. Her breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with the person standing in front of her. Disbelief crashed over her like a wave, freezing her in place. Of all the possibilities she had considered, this wasn't one of them. You? The word barely escaped her lips. The figure tilted their head slightly, a faint smirk playing at their lips, as if amused by her reaction. You look surprised. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This doesn't make sense. Beside her, he tensed, his grip on her hand loosening just slightly. She could feel the weight of unspoken words between them. He had known this was a possibility. Maybe not this exact person, but that someone close to them had been pulling the strings all along. You never questioned why things happened the way they did you? The person took a slow step forward, their voice eerily calm. Why he left so suddenly? Why everything fell apart? She forced herself to take a breath, her mind racing. Why? Why would you do this? A soft laugh, almost pitying. Because I had to. It was maddening the way they spoke, like they had all the answers, like this was just another conversation. But it wasn't. You're lying, she said, shaking her head. This isn't about survival. This isn't about protecting anyone. This is about control. The smirk faded slightly. Believe what you want. She clenched her fists, a sharp anger cutting through the fear. You ruined everything. You manipulated, you pushed him away, you. I did what was necessary, the figure interrupted, their tone harder now. And you? You should have stayed out of it. She took a step forward this time, refusing to back down. Well, I didn't. A flicker of something passed through the person's eyes, frustration, maybe even regret. But it was gone too quickly to be sure. The tension in the alley stretched unbearably, time slowing to a crawl. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her, the choices she had made, the ones she still had to make. And then, in the smallest shift of movement, she saw it. A hesitation. A crack in the carefully controlled facade. It was enough. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm and moved. Fast. They bolted past the nearest opening in the alley, the sound of footsteps close behind them. She didn't know where they were going, only that they couldn't stop now. They ran until her lungs burned, until the streets blurred together, until the sounds of pursuit finally faded. Only then did they stop, ducking into the shadows of an empty side street. Her heart pounded as she turned to him. We need to end this. He met her gaze, breathing heavily. Are you sure? She nodded. I can't live looking over my shoulder. I can't keep running. We have to face this. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then slowly, he exhaled. Okay. It wasn't easy. Confronting the truth never was. But piece by piece, they unraveled the lies, the betrayals, the web of manipulation that had been spun around them for so long. They exposed everything. And when the dust finally settled, when the people who had tried to control their lives could no longer hide behind secrets, she realized something. She was free. Not just from them, not just from the past, but from the weight of everything she had been holding on to. One evening, as the city lights flickered around her, she stood by the window, letting the quiet settle in. She had spent so long believing closure meant getting answers, that it meant hearing apologies, or seeing regret in someone's eyes. But now, she knew the truth. Closure wasn't something given. It was something you claimed for yourself. She turned away from the window, feeling lighter than she had in years. It was time to move forward. Not because the past didn't matter, but because she finally understood that it didn't define her. And as she walked away, she knew this time she wasn't looking back.